The Scream of the Dead. The Scream of the Dead man gave to me that acute and added horror of Dr. Herbert West, which harassed the later years of our companionship. It is natural that such a thing as a dead man's scream should give horror, for it is obviously not a pleasing or ordinary occurrence that I was used to similar experiences, hence suffered on this occasion only because of particular circumstance. And I have implied that it is not of the dead man himself that I became afraid. Herbert West was whose associate and assistant I was, possessed scientific interests far beyond the usual routine of a village physician. That was why, when establishing his practice in Bolton, he had chosen an isolated house near the Potter's Field. Briefly and brutally stated, West's sole absorbing interest was a secret study of the phenomenon of life and its cessation, leading towards the reanimation of the dead. Through injections of an exigent solution for this ghastly experimenting, was necessary to have a constant supply of the very fresh human bodies. Very fresh because even the least decay hopelessly damaged the brain structure. But human because we found that the solution had to be compounded differently for different types of organisms. Scores of rabbits and guinea pigs had been killed and treated, but their trail was blind one. West had never fully succeeded because he had never been able to secure a corpse sufficiently fresh. What he wanted were bodies from which vitality had only just departed, bodies with every cell intact and capable of receiving again the impulse toward that mode of motion called life. There was hope that the second and artificial life might be made perpetual by repetitions of the injection, but we had learned that an ordinary natural life would not respond to action. To establish the artificial motion, nocturnal life must be extinct. The specimens must be very fresh, but genuinely dead. The awesome quest had begun when West and I were students at the Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham, vividly conscious for the first time of the thoroughly mechanical nature of life. That was 7 years before, but West looked scarcely, I'd say, older now. He was small, blond, clean-shaven, soft-voiced, and spectacled, with only an occasional flash of cold blue eyes to tell the hardening, growing fanaticism of his character under the pressure of the terrible investigations. Our experiences had often been hideous to the extreme. The results of defective reanimation in lumps of graveyard clay had been lavished into morbid, unnatural, brainless motion by various modifications of the vital solution. But one thing had uttered a nerve-shattering scream, another had risen, violently beaten us both to unconsciousness, and ran amok in shocking way before it could have been placed behind asylum bars. So another a loathsome African monstrosity had clawed out of its shallow grave and done a deed West had to shoot at that object. We could not get bodies fresh enough to show any trace of reason when reanimated, so had perforce created nameless horrors. It was disturbing to think that one, perhaps two, of our monsters still lived. That thought haunted us shadowingly, till finally West disappeared under frightful circumstances, but at the first time of the scream in the cellar laboratory, extremely fresh specimens of the isolated Bolton cottage. Our fears were subordinate to our anxiety for extremely fresh specimens. West was more of it than I, so that it almost seemed to me that he looked half covetously at a very healthy living physique. It was in July 1910 that the bad luck regarding specimens began to return. I had been on a long visit to my parents in Illinois, and upon my return found West in a state of singular elation. He had told me excitingly, in all likelihood, solve the problem of freshness through an approach from an entirely new angle, that of artificial preservation. I had known that he was working on a new and highly unusual embalming compound, and was not surprised that it had turned out well, but until he explained the details, I was rather puzzled as to how such a compound could help in our work, since the objectionable staleness of the specimens was largely due to the delay occurring before we secured them. This I now saw. West had clearly recognized creating his embalming compound for future rather than immediate use, trusting to fate to supply again some very recent and unburied corpse, as it had years before when we obtained the Negro killed in Bolton prize fight. At last, fate had been kind, so that on the occasion there lay in the secret cellar laboratory of corpse whose decay could not be by any possible have begun. What would happen on reanimation, whether we would hope for revival of mind and reason, West did not venture to predict. The experiment would be a landmark in our studies, and he had saved a new body for my return, so that both might share the spectacle in a custom fashion. West told me how he had obtained the specimen. It had been a vigorous man, a well-dressed stranger just off of the train, on his way to transact some business with the Bolton worsted mills. The walk through the town had been long, and by the time the traveler paused at the cottage to ask the way to the factories, his heart had become greatly overtaxed. He had refused the stimulant, and had suddenly dropped dead only a moment later. The body, as might be expected, to seem to West a heaven-sent gift. In his brief conversation, the stranger had made it clear that he was unknown in Bolton. In search of his pockets, subsequently revealed him to be one Robert Leavitt of St. Louis, apparently without a family, to make inquiries about his disappearance. If this man could be restored alive, no one would know of our experiments. We buried our materials in a dense strip of woods between the house and the Potter's Field. If, on the other hand, he could be destroyed, our fame would be really and perpetually established. So without delay, West had injected into the body's wrist a compound which would hold it fresh for use after my arrival. The matter of the presumably weak heart, which to my mind imperiled the success of our experiments, did not appear to trouble West extensively. He hoped at last to obtain what he would have never obtained before, a rekindled spark of reason, and perhaps a normal living creature. So on the night of July 18, 1910, Herbert West and I stood in the cellar laboratory and gazed at a white, silent figure beneath the dazzling arc lights. The embalming compound had worked uncannily well, for as I stared fascinatedly at the sturdy frame which had 2 weeks without stiffening, I was moved to see West's assurance that the thing was really dead. This assurance he gave readily enough, reminding me the reanimation solution was never used without careful tests as to life. since it could have no effect. Any of the original vitality was present. As Wes proceeded to take preliminary steps, I was impressed by the vast intricacy of the new experiment, an intricacy so vast he could not trust no hand less delicate than his own. Forbidding me to touch the body, he first injected a dry foot in the wrist, besides the place he needed his needle, and punctured when injecting the embalming compound. This, he said, was to neutralize the compound and release the system to normal relaxation so that the reanimation solution might freely work. When injected slightly later, when a change from gentle tremor seemed to afflict the dead limbs, he stuffed a pillow-like object violently over the twitching face, not withdrawing it until the corpse appeared quiet and ready for our attempt at reanimation. The pale enthusiast now applied some last perfunctory test for absolute lifelessness, withdrew satisfied, and finally injected into the left arm an accurately measured amount of the vital elixir, prepared during the afternoon with greater care than we had used since college days, when our feet were new and groping. I cannot express the wild, breathless suspense with which we waited for results on this first really fresh specimen, the first we could reasonably expect to open its lips in rational speech, perhaps to tell what had been beyond the unfathomable abyss. West was a materialist, believing in no soul, and attributing all the workings of the consciousness of the body, bodily phenomenon. Consequently, he looked for no revelation of hideous secrets from gulfs and caverns beyond death's barrier. I did not wholly disagree with him theoretically, yet held a vague instinctive remnants of a primitive faith of my forefathers, so that I could not help eyeing the corpse with a certain amount of awe and terrible expectation. Besides, I could not extract my memory that hideous inhuman shriek we heard on the night we tried our first experiments in the deserted farmhouse at Arkham. Very little time had elapsed before I saw that attempt was not to be a total failure. A touch of color came to the cheeks, hitherto chalk white and spread out under the curiously ample stubble of sandy beard. West, who had his hand on the pulse of the left wrist, suddenly nodded significantly, and almost simultaneously a mist appeared on the mirror inclined above the body's mouth. There followed a few spasmodic muscular motions, and then an audible breathing and visible motion. With the chest, I looked at the closed eyelids, and I detected a quivering. Then the lids opened, showing eyes which were gray, calm, and alive, but still unintelligent and not even curious. In a moment of fantastic whim, I whispered questions to the reddening ears, questions of other worlds, of which the memory might still be present. Subsequent terror drove them from my mind, but I think the last one which I repeated was, "Where have you been?" I do not yet know whether I was answered or not, for no sound came from the well-shut mouth, but I do know that at the moment I firmly thought that the thin lips moved silently, forming syllables, which I would have vocalized as "only now," if the phrase had possessed any sense of relevancy. At that moment, I was elated with the conviction that the one great goal had been attained, and I, for the first time, a reanimated corpse, and uttered distinct words impelled by actual reason. And the next moment there was no doubt about the triumph, no doubt that the solution had truly accomplished, at least temporarily, its full mission of restoring rational, articulate life to the dead. But in that triumph there came to the greatest of all horrors, no, not horror of thing that spoke, but of the deed that I had witnessed, of the man whom my profession fortunes were joined. For that very fresh body had, alas, withering into full terrifying consciousness, with eyes dilated at the memory of his last scene on earth, threw out his frantic head in life and death struggle, with the air suddenly collapsing into a second and final solution. From there could no return. Screamed out the cry will ring eternally in my shooting brain. "Help! Keep off, you cursed little toe-head fiend! Keep that damned needle away from me!"